Imagine trying to plan your career path while your rent is 3 weeks overdue, or trying to maintain a strict diet while working double shifts just to keep the lights on. Behavioral researchers find that impulsive choices often result from a brain suffering under a resource-driven cognitive tax. In survival mode, executive function shifts into a state called tunneling, which prioritizes immediate needs and makes long-term strategy difficult to maintain. This contradicts the classic economic myth of Homo economicus, the idea that humans are naturally rational actors who always weigh the future against the present. Under this old logic, poor choices are evidence of laziness or a lack of education. Viewing these decisions as moral failings ignores the biological reality. When resources vanish, the brain's internal processing changes to meet the threat. We can think of the prefrontal cortex as the brain's CEO, running a suite of executive functions. These are the processes responsible for working memory, inhibitory control, and the cognitive flexibility needed to switch between tasks. Running these higher-level systems is metabolically and effortfully expensive. It takes significant physiological energy to consciously resist an impulse or solve a complex problem. Because these functions are so energy-intensive, they act as an early warning system. When you are low on money, time, or food, these delicate executive processes are the first to suffer. Scarcity dismantles the exact cognitive tools a person needs to escape their situation. This mental strain is known as a bandwidth tax. The constant worry of having too little creates a background noise that occupies working memory, leaving less room for deliberate thought. Researchers measured this effect in a landmark study involving sugarcane farmers in India. These farmers receive their entire year's income in a single lump sum after the harvest. This creates a cycle where they are relatively rich for part of the year and poor during the months leading up to the next harvest. Scientists tested the same farmers at 2 different points in this cycle, once while they were under intense financial pressure, and again when their pockets were full. The results showed a significant drop in performance during the pre-harvest period. The farmers were literally less capable of solving logic puzzles and remembering information when they were struggling to make ends meet. The data showed that the experience of poverty reduced cognitive capacity as effectively as losing a full night of sleep. For these farmers, the stress of the lean season acted as a physical drain on their mental resources, regardless of their actual intelligence or skill. To cope with this drain, the brain uses a survival adaptation called tunneling. It redirects its remaining conscious power, what scientists call System 2, to focus exclusively on the immediate scarcity. This creates a focus dividend. If you are short on rent, your brain becomes incredibly efficient at finding ways to pay that specific bill, ignoring everything else to solve the crisis at hand. But there is a cost. Anything outside that tunnel falls into decision neglect. Because the conscious mind is consumed by the emergency, all other choices are handed off to the automatic, impulsive System 1. This shows up in dietary habits. A stressed shopper may focus entirely on the immediate cost and calorie count to get through the week, neglecting nutritional information that would benefit them in the long run. This same neglect erodes inhibitory control. When you are tunneled, the future consequences of a high-risk loan or a poor investment seem far less relevant than the immediate need for cash. This loss of control drives behaviors like high-interest borrowing. The payday loan solves the problem inside the tunnel today, even if it creates a much larger problem outside the tunnel tomorrow. These choices are the collateral damage of a brain that has optimized its remaining bandwidth for short-term survival. When we zoom out, we can see how these individual biological moments combine to create a lifelong obstacle. The cycle begins when a lack of resources creates a heavy cognitive load. That load triggers tunneling, which forces the brain to rely on impulsive, automatic decisions for anything that isn't the immediate priority. Those impulsive decisions, like taking on high-interest debt, create even deeper scarcity. This in turn increases the cognitive tax and narrows the tunnel further. The brain's survival strategy effectively reinforces the very conditions that triggered it, making the underlying scarcity harder to escape with every rotation of the cycle. Recognizing this biological reality shifts the conversation around poverty and public health. It is impossible to educate someone out of a bandwidth deficit. Handing out financial literacy pamphlets or complex diet plans simply adds more weight to an already overloaded cognitive system. We cannot expect a brain to exercise inhibitory control when it has already rerouted its power away from those centers to manage a crisis. The prevailing logic suggests that this is an education problem. If struggling individuals simply learned how to budget, or if they took a financial literacy class, they would make better choices and climb their way out of debt. But data from cognitive psychology and behavioral economics reveals a different sequence of events. The bad decision-making doesn't cause the poverty drives the bad decision-making. Behavioral economists Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir developed a framework to explain this phenomenon. They call it scarcity theory. In this context, scarcity defines an inescapable psychological state, the constant, grinding feeling of having less than you need to survive. This feeling acts like a biological overwrite code. It interrupts the brain's normal operating system, redirecting processing power to handle the immediate crisis. Researchers refer to this as cognitive load. The constant worry about making rent or keeping the electricity on places an immense, invisible burden on the mind, severely reducing the bandwidth available for anything else. Under the crush of this extreme pressure, the brain is not malfunctioning. It is redirecting every available resource toward immediate survival. This cognitive shift creates what is known as the rational bias split, and it begins with a surprising advantage: the focus dividend. When confronted with an immediate financial threat, the brain pulls all of its slow, deliberative, and highly rational processing power, often called System 2, and points it directly at the problem. To observe this in action, economists conducted a large-scale study among farmers in Zambia, using the agricultural cycle to test human cognition under varying states of financial stress. The researchers tested the farmers' susceptibility to the endowment effect, a common cognitive bias where people overvalue items simply because they own them. They ran these tests at different points in the harvest cycle. The critical period was the pre-harvest season. During this time, the farmers are severely strapped for cash, stretching every last resource until the crops come in. This chart compares the results. Standard microeconomic models predict a high rate of irrational choices due to the endowment effect. But during the extreme scarcity of the pre-harvest, the farmers demonstrated a much lower failure rate. They became highly rational. Faced with a critical shortage, people in poverty act as incredibly efficient mathematical calculators, maximizing the resources they have to survive the moment. But human cognitive bandwidth is a strictly finite resource, and this intense focus exacts a devastating toll. Dedicating all that processing power to a pressing financial problem acts as an involuntary heavy tax on the rest of the brain. This diagram from academic research maps out the mechanics of that tax. Financial scarcity sets off a chain reaction across our cognitive framework. As the load increases on these elements, performance in essential mental functions begins to suffer. Working memory drops. Inhibitory control slips. We see this clearly when comparing the Zambian farmers across the seasons. The same individuals who suffered cognitive depletion during the pre-harvest showed significant cognitive restoration once the crops were sold and their wealth increased. Surviving a day in poverty requires so much mental computing power that the brain is left exhausted and unable to handle any other task. So what happens to all the other life decisions that fall outside that narrow tunnel of immediate survival? Because the rational brain is entirely occupied, secondary decisions are automatically handed off to our fast, impulsive, and emotional processing center, known as System 1. This helps explain dietary patterns in lower-income populations. Even when individuals are fully aware of nutritional guidelines, their diets often consist of unhealthier options. The cognitive load of financial stress drains the exact inhibitory control required to resist cheap, high-calorie foods at the end of an exhausting day. This also triggers time discounting. The brain stops placing value on future rewards or long-term health outcomes because it is busy managing an absolute, immediate crisis in the present. These seemingly self-sabotaging choices do not stem from ignorance. They are the unavoidable mathematical reality of a depleted cognitive system defaulting to impulse. Armed with this biological understanding of the brain,
those initial societal stereotypes look disconnected from reality. Consider a working mother who takes out a payday loan with astronomical interest rates just to cover that month's rent. From the outside, this is categorized as a terrible financial decision, but it is not a failure of intellect, a lack of education, or a moral shortcoming. Her brain executes a brutal, highly evolved calculation to secure shelter today, rendering it entirely blind to the financial cost that will hit tomorrow. This is the tragic paradox of the rational bias split. The very same cognitive competence required to survive the short term guarantees vulnerability in the long term. For policymakers and institutions, the data points to a clear conclusion. Society cannot simply educate its way out of a scarcity mindset. Offering financial literacy courses or stressing the importance of long-term planning demands cognitive bandwidth that a person in deep financial stress simply does not possess at that moment. The science suggests a different solution. Economists call it slack. It means designing policies and systems that provide people with actual financial and mental breathing room. Meaningful interventions must alleviate the immediate financial panic first. Once that pressure is lifted and cognitive bandwidth is restored, individuals are fully capable of planning for their own futures. To solve systemic poverty, we have to stop treating it as a character flaw and start treating it as a cognitive crisis.